It's a pleasure to be speaking with the Asia Society, and I I believe it's for a pan South Asian audience. So I welcome people from all from the subcontinent who might have joined. Uh, Actually, when we look at the at South Asia and the subcontinent, it's a shared set of issues that we have of some amazing heritage and yet challenges that face us in terms of funding, of policy, of engagement, stakeholders, population pressures, and development. And when we look at India and of course, the larger subcontinent, we have a built heritage of 6 millennia. And yet, in India, we have less than 3,700 monuments that are protected under national law. And yet, as a nation, we seem to be obsessed with the monumental. And we've had, enough debates and discussions about the yellowing of the Taj Mahal would cause, would create newspaper headlines. But when it comes to the vast majority of our monuments, they are set within an urban scape. And very often, our largest setting of the monument that provides the essential context to the monument has been badly compromised. We have a lot of encroachments, unplanned growth, and really, while we're able to focus on the monument, we are losing the picture, the bigger picture of the context. And this is something that repeats across cities, whether it's Agra, Delhi, Hyderabad, across. We have this picture postcard version of our monuments, and the ground reality is far from that. So that really is something that has probably been one of the key issues that has bothered me as a practitioner and a professional. And I've always really wanted to do something to establish prototypes or pilots or replicable models that we can actually adopt to address these issues. So in the South Asian context, really what should be our priority? And therefore, while the 3,600 odd monuments are looked after by the government, should we not focus on the non-monumental, the unprotected, those historic buildings and precincts and sites that do not have national protection? And this is one of the projects that I worked on 20 years ago. I worked on the Chamba Lakhang in Basgo at 11,000 feet altitude in Ladakh for the World Monuments Fund and the Namgyal Institute of Research on Ladakhi Art and Culture. And this was one of the key projects. It was on the WMF list of 100 endangered monuments, and it was not even accessible in the winter season. So this project was something that was not, it had no governmental protection, was in the realm of private or trust ownership. It belonged to the Hemis monastery, and there were no funds for it. So when the local villagers of Basgo wanted to restore and conserve their own heritage, they came up with a very unique option of, under the Wilson Challenge grant, they matched every dollar that World Monuments Fund gave with local contribution of their time, of their labor, of their material. And this is a little puja that happened at the deconsecration before we began work on the temple, where the Rinpoche did a puja, and the soul of the Buddha, in a way, the spirit was wrapped up in silk. And so we could really begin. But the unique part of this project was it had completely a grassroots upwards approach. My client, the contractor, both were the local village community, and they formed human chains carrying material up the hill. The local monks were part of the decision making. And I, as the conservation architect, decided that whatever we do here in this project, the materials should be sourced locally. So For our scaffolding, we used local timber and local mud blocks. For the conservation project, we divided it over 3 seasons because you could only work between end April when the snow was melting until October. And then the site had to be closed for the winter season where went down to minus 40 degrees. And the entire team consisted of local village people and the village community. There were no structural engineers from outside, and in a sense, only the architect was the outsider. What we did, therefore, in this project was phase out the project over 3 years. The first year, we did a lot of investigations, procurement of material. We understood that the roof, for example, when we did some studies, they had just kept throwing mud over years and decades every time there was a need for repair. And the entire bulk of the terrace waterproofing of mud had come up to almost 2 feet and was severely overloading the roof terrace. And then at the base, the waterproofing material that had been used 500 years ago was bhojpatra or birch bark that is only sourced from Kashmir. So it took us a year to get permission from the Jammu Kashmir Wildlife and the Forest Department to collect fallen birch bark. We used traditional practices that had been living for 500 years and local skills and local wisdom that is part of the traditional wisdom of Ladakh to make sure that everything from, the material, the replacement of the broken kajus, the craftsmen, the use of zasa and various local grasses and clays was done as per the traditions of Ladakh that had sustained for 500 years. And when we restored it in 2007, it won the highest UNESCO Award of Excellence, which was the first in the region. But at the end of the project of 3 years, our total project cost was 15 lakh rupees. And I think that says a lot for how conservation can become cost effective and be something which is sustainable and long term if the local community engages with the project. I'm moving geographically, so I'll move to Punjab now. Punjab divided and in a way faced the brunt of partition the maximum. And therefore, right after independence, we did not see any kind of engagement with Punjab's architectural heritage for a long time. And it's probably because the Punjabis wanted to talk of the future, talk of growth, and culture and heritage was something that touched a raw nerve. And in 2013, my firm was appointed by the government of Punjab to look at preparing detailed project reports and conservation plans for their finest, their grade 1 state monuments. And the Kila Mubarak, which is Punjab's oldest Sikh fort of the Patiala family, was really something that was in ruins. We began looking at these monuments that had been crumbling, had bats and pigeons, because nobody had really lived in them for 50 years. And because Punjab had not really had conservation projects over the last 60, 70 years, there was a dearth of local craftsmen. And the local craftsmen were used to cement and concrete, but not really lime plaster. So we actually went and engaged 4 old Sikh gentlemen in their 80s who really were local mistris and who remembered the cultural practices and the traditions of lime plaster. And they, in turn, trained an entire generation of Punjabi masons in the traditional techniques. And with that was the phase 1. And with the same project, we looked at many such monuments that belonged to Punjab state archaeology. And this is a Jahangir period caravanserai, which had actually lost half the building because over the years, it had been abandoned, disused, and the brick from the walls had been used to build new houses by the villagers. So what we were left is really half the caravanserai. And it was important to be able to consolidate at least that half so it remained. And the conservation processes that we followed were, of course, standard textbook conservation. And then we went about replicating and reconstructing using traditional Mughal practices, materials, and vaulting systems to ensure that at least we were able to consolidate and save half of that caravanserai. So again, we trained local masons, local craftsmen in Mughal construction techniques, and we were able to rebuild these fallen walls and cells. And yet again in Kapurthala, where is this most beautiful mosque, the Moorish mosque, built by Maharaja Jagatjit Singh of Kapurthala, which had completely fallen to great dilapidation. The roof tiles had come off, the timber roofs had given up. Here, the conversation was as much about conservation as a science, as a profession, but also understanding the need for establishing benchmarks for the region and to ensure that this gave the local population a confidence that Punjab could look after its monuments. And in a post-partition, again, this was a mosque, but the local community was not there. And we undertook the restoration of this mosque with a lot of inputs from the grandson of Maharaja Jagatjit Singh, Brigadier Sukhjit Singh, who's seen in the bottom left picture, who remembered as a young boy the opening of this mosque and the inauguration, and was an absolutely invaluable resource when it came to deciding what the original color scheme was and many of the elements and details that the mosque originally had. And this was then restored through government funds and brought back to life. But conservation in South Asia also faces a severe and acute shortage of funds. And that is why it's also important for conservation projects to be supported by corporates, by foundations, and other private players. And one such case is that of the restoration of Shalimar Bagh, which is, of course, one of the most beautiful and most important Mughal landscapes of the world. And Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir was then begun as a pilot corporate social responsibility project funded by the JSW Foundation. And one of the key challenges here was that the oldest building, which was the Diwan-e-Am, built in the reign of Jahangir, was absolutely crumbling and had been declared structurally unsafe. And to be able to restore its ceilings, the painted ceilings, we took on this task of ensuring that every workman was local. So Kashmiri workmen, Kashmiri art conservators, we set up a conservation lab within Shalimar Bagh in one of the other pavilions in Noor Mahal, and very painstakingly first documented this entire ceiling, then had to restore each and every panel within the site conservation lab and put it back once the building was structurally safe. And this was done very slowly, sometimes people feel, but it was done because everything was done using original practices, using local craftsmen, local conservators, and we've managed to do this and to take up 3 more pavilions within the Mughal garden. When we talk of palaces, another phenomena in this region is a lot of royal palaces that had fallen into decay, despair, dilapidation, and abandonment. And one such case was that of the Chowmahala Palace in Hyderabad. And in the year 2000, Princess Ezra, the wife of Prince Mukarram Jah, took on the challenge of embarking on a very ambitious project to conserve this entire complex in the heart of Hyderabad. She took on Rahul Mehrotra, Martan Singh, Shobita Punja, a whole team of conservators, archivists, to bring together pool our resources. And this team then took on the task of restoring, conserving, and reviving this palace complex. Our first challenge was not just to bring back the buildings, but to look at individual palaces, and there were many, and create a phase-wise system of being able to restore a palace, give it a use, restore the interiors, and then open it up to the public. And today it is perhaps one of the most visited sites in Hyderabad after the Charminar. But what it has also done is bring back a lot of pride for the community with the everything from the costumes to the historic interiors of the palace come back to life. And this we completed in 2007, so nearly 20 years ago. And it was one of the largest privately funded conservation projects. And it just is something that has helped many other projects follow suit. And another one of these was the Jaivilas Palace in Gwalior, where we created a master plan, then looked at conserving individual galleries and presenting the narrative of the royals. And on another hand, a government museum in a very Mufassal area, which was the Bharatpur Museum, which is in a tiny town and was an erstwhile palace and then had been taken up by the state archaeology. But the challenge was, how do you create an international level museum in a small community so that they don't feel that because they're a B class town or a C class town, they need to deal with a B class or a C class design for the museum. And this was a challenging and a really richly rewarding project, which my team did for Rajasthan government. And I hope that we were able to create a kind of a difference in the way government museums are looked at across cities and smaller towns, especially. Another kind of a project where the building belonged to the government, but a non-profit took on the responsibility of ensuring the highest standards of conservation practice, was that of Lal Bagh Palace, which technically belongs to the government of Madhya Pradesh. It is a state archaeology monument. But if we try to think of restoring a French interior, Baroque interior to the greatest level of detailing, that we ensured that 35 kinds of damasks were used in the furnishings, and each weave had to be specially rewoven to ensure that the pattern stayed the same, so that every curtain was exactly replicated, or the Aubusson carpets were restored to the level that were required of this. It was impossible for a government tender to take care of that. And for that reason, the World Monuments Fund brought in corporate support from the Indigo Airlines. And with this, we set up restoring each and every intricate detail of the period rooms in the Lal Bagh Palace. And that was done with art conservators led by Anupam Shah. So what one really sees then is that you need to have museums that are living museums. We need to constantly upgrade and redesign and upgrade the interiors. Museums range from large palace museums to small historic homes like Swaraj Bhavan and Anand Bhavan in Allahabad, which belonged once to the Nehru family and are run by trusts. But at every level, or Mani Bhavan Gandhi Sangrahalaya, but at every level, the idea is to engage respectfully with the building and yet keep the building and the museum relevant to the contemporary user. And one such case of adaptive reuse is that of another kind of a home, a historic home, which is Bikaner House, which was the erstwhile home of the Maharaja of Bikaner in Lutyens, Delhi. And designed by Blomfield, this is a great building, but then it fell into an absolute and utter, I wouldn't even call it neglect, but misuse, because it was really the bus adda, or the bus stop to go to catch a bus to go to Rajasthan for many, many years. And it was riddled with the ubiquitous issues of tube lights, pan stains on the wall, and a very sarkari, plywood partitions and false ceilings. And this project that was done to restore not just the building, but also its interiors and convert it into a cultural center so that people get to use it. Today, now been nearly 7 years, and it's been used for everything from book releases to cultural dance performances and art exhibitions. And that makes, therefore, for all these various kinds of historic homes, it eventually comes down to how respectfully we are able to articulate the architectural aspects of the building, the interior, the significance of the interiors, and then give it some kind of a use that keeps them relevant. And then conservation moves on to a larger sphere, that of how do you interface with interventions like metro within a historic town. And that kind of a scale is perhaps something which one can explain through the Jaipur Wall City Metro project. This was a very large infrastructure scheme of introducing an underground metro line through the heart of Jaipur's walled city. The biggest challenge was that this was going to have tunnel boring machines tunnel through really beds of sand in a desert environment and going right under the densest areas of Havelis, of the Jantar Mantar, of some of the greatest monuments of Jaipur, which is now a World Heritage UNESCO site, and to be able to do that by still ensuring that we retain the historic fabric. So for this, my team were consultants to Asian Development Bank, and the metro line was going exactly under this road. So our first challenge before the tunnel boring machine that you see to the left was able to bore under the Chandpol gate that you see in the far left, which was really a load-bearing masonry gate with very short foundations on sand. And the concern was that once the tunnel boring machine goes through, the vibrations would cause irrevocable damage to such masonry structures and pretty much all of the streetscapes of Jaipur. So we undertook a really intense exercise of mapping and documenting every building along the path, understanding and calibrating the vibrations and the possibility of vibrations to these structures, and really calibrating them to an extent that we could map and it would set off alarm bells if there was even a 2 millimeter of movement within any structure. And that also make us take a very hard look at what it was around these areas. And the underground metro station was proposed at Choti Chopar and Badi Chopar, which are really roundabouts, but these were essentially urban squares. And while we were on this project and researching, we realized that what we see as a roundabout is, in this photograph, something of a stepwell. But nobody in living memory had seen this stepwell. And for 150 years, it had been filled in and forgotten. And then we began an exercise of an archaeological dig at Choti Chopar, which is not something you expect from an underground metro project. And when we conducted this archaeological dig, we actually were able to reveal the historic marble Gaumok's. What we then landed up doing is, though it was an urban infrastructure project, we landed up doing the archaeology, restoring the Kund, and sinking the entire metro station 6 meters below where it was originally designed for, so that you could alight from the metro station and walk out into the Kund, and the area around the metro station underground below the road level. So while we were able to restore the Kund, we were able to create a huge museum of archaeology under the road, because that was the area that we were left with once we sank the metro line further down. That brings me to, what do we do with conservation in dense urban cities like Mumbai? And in a way, Mumbai presents the case study for heritage conservation. Heavy monsoons, very high densities, and no centrally protected monuments on the island city. So it really is the worst case scenario for heritage. And yet, in 1995, the citizens of Mumbai made the listings possible, and Mumbai became the first city to adopt the heritage regulations, which meant that outside the ambit of state or national protection, the city decided to declare 663 buildings and small elements within the city as of heritage value. But when I came into the city in 1995, what really struck me was that it had these beautiful streetscapes, but there could be barely seen behind these large signboards. So I began with mapping each and every street, each and every arch and every building on Dadabhai Nauroji Road, which is really the heart of the central commercial district of the fort. And what it was really was a mismatch and of the signboards. So using small sketches, I would go back to the shopkeepers, and one by one we created literally a local stakeholder group that we were able to convince the shops like the McDonald's to remove their large signboards and place it within these arches. And one by one, completely voluntarily, the street and people on the street agreed to move their signboards and to place them within the arches and not to deface the buildings. And then we got together and had every bit of the street furniture funded by the local community. So Avaliji's luggage paid for the cobblestone and cast iron street furniture outside his shop. And this really became, between 1999 and 2001, India's first urban streetscape project. After that, we've had Smart City and other projects come up over the next 2 decades with government funding, but this was the first and the only one with citizen funding. And then that led to a public interest litigation that Anahita Pandol, a gynecologist, filed against the Bombay Municipal Corporation, against the absolute mess of hoardings and billboards that were pasted across the city. I was a member of the Heritage Committee, and one of my tasks was to go and check every signboard and to give a reading on why they shouldn't be there. And when we finally got rid of these signboards, you could actually see the buildings breathe. And this led us and to many other initiatives of citizens taking responsibility for their heritage in Mumbai without seeking government funds. And I think we've done this now for over 25 years. This is the JJ School of Art, one of the oldest buildings. And a small group called the Friends of JJ School of Art was formed. With that, we raised money through a Ravi Shankar concert at the NCPA. We raised 18 lakhs and we got another 32 lakhs from the first member parliament funds from Pritish Nandi and restored this building through public funding. In 1998, I was a founder member of the Kala Ghoda Association, where we realized that around this area of Kala Ghoda, which went dead at night, there were so many existing cultural activities, institutions like the Prince of Wales Museum, the National Gallery of Modern Art, that if we could club these together, we could create a critical mass to give a cultural identity to this area and use that to restore its buildings. And with that, we set up the first Kala Ghoda festival in 1998. And with no funding from the government, we just threw open every bit of this precinct, whether it was footpaths or this is the parking lot or terrace gardens, to culture. And I remember we hosted the first morning raga performance by the Gundecha brothers on the roof of the Jahangir Art Gallery. We used the rear garden of the David Sassoon Library for poetry readings. We had Ustad Zakir Hussain perform live on the parking lot to an unticketed audience of, I think, about 5,000 or 7,000 people. And for the last 25 years, the Kala Ghoda Association has made culture public and accessible, so that culture and conservation that are often seen as something that are the indulgence of the elite became mainstream in Mumbai. And to the right is the first Kala Ghoda Festival brochure that I sketched out, the bottom right. And it's now been over 25 years, and the Kalagura Foundation and the association continues to do that. And with each festival, of the first festival, we took on the restoration of the Elphinstone College, and after that, we took on, this is the interior of the lobby, which was seemed like painted ceiling. It could have been a waffle ceiling. And when all we had to do was scrape off the layers of paint to reveal the Burma teak. And a lot of these beautiful Victorian Gothic public buildings just come alive because there's greater engagement with people. And what I think the Kalagura Association's managed to do in 25 years is raise the level of awareness about that, and the kind of pride that Mumbaikars feel in their own heritage. And that is truly important, because you can't believe in this region that everything would be looked after by the government. Over the last 25 years, we've also had some of the greatest performers perform here free to a live audience, and literally repurposed every open space in the city, be it the steps of the Asiatic Library at night for a rock concert, and in the morning for children's activities. And what it has done gradually is it finally forced the local government, the Public Works Department, to start understanding that conservation of heritage is important and it can't be clubbed with new construction. And the Asiatic Society and the town hall was then restored through government funding with the Public Works Department, where we were able to restore this historic building. But our main aim was not just to restore this historic building, but also its period interiors that had been completely filled over with steel cupboards, tube lights. And I think this is something, again, that is across India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We will see these beautiful public buildings that have been absolutely abused with the kind of additions that we have made to them. There was vinyl flooring, linoleum on the floor, paint, different colors of paint, and an entire mess of wiring. And as part of this project, we were able to then restore the building, restore the furniture, and bring back the Regency period furniture that was part of the building's original vocabulary. And it's so important, especially for public libraries and public buildings, because these are what are used by the citizens. So this is a couple of before and after pictures of the Asiatic Library. That somebody had actually done a lavender color just out of personal choice. So paint scrapes helped establish the original color palette. We had to redesign the lighting and bring this back to the dignity it deserved. Another such project is the Convocation Hall of the University of Mumbai, designed by Sir Gilbert Scott, who actually is the one who designed the one more building in Karachi. So with this important building in 2005, the university needed to celebrate its 150th year, and they had only half the funds. So the other half was brought in by the Tata Trusts, and we restored the historic stained glass, the lights, the roof had been leaking, and the entire stone vault had to be restored. And this is what it was restored as. And just this week, after 20 years of restoration, the Dorab Tata Trusts have pledged funds again to be able to touch up the building and to continue its conservation. This is a small example of how, just by removing the shutters, the rolling shutters, and going back to the traditional way of folding, shutters that we see across Girgaon, Gamdevi, everywhere in old Mumbai shops, that we could restore facades of historic streetscapes. And the Knesset El Young Synagogue, which is one of the most beautiful Jewish synagogues in the city, was restored through, again, corporate funding by the JSW. And every paint scrape helped us establish the original color palette, the original color scheme that had been completely lost to overpainting. After working in this area for many, many years, it only made sense that I pitch this idea of a UNESCO World Heritage Site status for Mumbai's Art Deco and Victorian ensemble. And to be able to get it inscribed as a World Heritage Site, it took me 14 years, but it's now a World Heritage Site. And I think that gives a new lease of life to these buildings. And with every year, we try and continue restoring and conserving these historic buildings. The David Sassoon Library within this World Heritage Site is one of the oldest libraries. And to the right, you can see that it had a flat slab that was its roof for many years, because originally there was a gable which had been demolished in the 60s and replaced with a concrete slab. And when I was called in by the library, the slab had been leaking, and it was really a choice of, do we repair a later intervention of a concrete slab or go back to the original design? And we chose to break the slab and put back the original roof profile, which was there in the old photographs. And with that, we put back the roof. And what it has done is completely transformed the interior and the spatial experience of this library, because it has not increased the width or the floor plan of the library, but just doubled the height of the library and completely changed the way the interior is perceived. And this was done through many donors. It was not just one. So everyone from the Kalagoda Association to the Hermes and JSW and ICICI Bank pulled in. And this was done within a year. And finally, we do have then incidents of government buildings being restored through government projects. And this is the Municipal Corporation for Greater Mumbai, where we restored a typical Sarkari office with tube lights and water being collected, rainwater, which is leaking through the roofs, being collected in buckets to restore these. Many other projects too, which have helped restore a cultural aspect of the city, are those like the Opera House, which was a completely decrepit and abandoned cinema hall, which had not been used for 25 years and declared unsafe, to be brought back to life and come back to being used as an opera house in 2006. And for the last 9 years has continued to be an active opera theatre and a venue for cultural activities through private funding. And finally, the Baikala station, which is Asia's oldest railway station, and how three women, Meenal Bajaj, Shaina NC, and I, as citizens of Mumbai, decided that this is probably the least talked about railway station, even though it's the oldest. And we pledged our resources pro bono to this railway station. And when we started the work, Corona and the pandemic hit. And while people and migrant labor was forced out to walk back to their villages, what we did here was the railway stations were not working. So through the pandemic, all the labor who were working on this project, to the left is what it was, and to the right is after removing the cement and the plaster, we were able to bring back the original railway station. So we got the labor to stay on the railway platform and live in the railway station through the pandemic. And while they got livelihood and they got to stay in this station, they continued restoring it and working on its structural repair, the roof repair, the restoration of the windows. And at the end of the pandemic, we had a restored station before the trains began running again. And this went to win a UNESCO award as well. And then we also worked through the pandemic on the Bandra station. And by bringing it from this to this, I think what it has achieved is a sense of pride for the citizens of the city. And again, it reinforces the fact that heritage and conservation need not be limited to monuments, but can be for everyday buildings that are being used by people. And therefore, over these years, my practice has tried to look at monuments, but focus more on bringing back to life public buildings which impact people every day. And we have yes, also worked on a lot of monuments and World Heritage sites like Ajanta and Bodh Gaya, and Mandu and Sarnath. In Vadnagar, we're working on a new idea of looking at urban conservation to a much larger scale, where we are working on restoring and 400 houses that do not belong to government, 400 individually owned private houses, where the government pitches in 80% of the funding and the 20% is brought in by the owners of the houses. And by doing this, we are creating a pilot whereby we can save these beautiful vernacular buildings that India is losing at a very rapid rate. And if Bhatnagar, which is more of an experiment as of now, our team of all women architects have been camping in Bhatnagar for a year, working with the local community, discussing with them what color palette they would want, what materials to use to restore their buildings. And I hope that once this project is complete, it would pave the way for many other small towns, regions like Shekhawati, Chettinad, and many, many other small urban streetscapes, rural streetscapes, to be able to be conserved rather than completely lost. Thank you.
Abha, thank you very much for that wonderful and very detailed presentation. I think the good thing about the presentation is we got to see a wonderful range, and I think that's quite important, especially for the context today. That as you mentioned right at the beginning of your presentation, that we are sitting in an audience that is coming from the region of South Asia, and I think there are many shared issues, right from the built heritage that we've sort of shared over years of migration histories, partition histories, etc., to issues such as funding, population, the kind of cities we are, what culture do we sort of inherit, belong to, etc. So I think in that sense, to see the range of work itself is very important. And what I want to do is I want to just sort of key mark some of the important comments you made, and some observations. I think from Ladakh to DN Road, I think one important lesson was the engagement of a local community, whether it is the shopkeeper at DN Road, to the sort of village that lives around a monastery or a temple in Ladakh. I think that's a very important point for us to hold on to, because it actually helps us understand something else that you said, and many of us have struggled with, that culture and conservation is not an indulgence of the elite. But right from the development of the Fort Precinct, which both of us are very familiar with, to the Kalagoda Arts Festival, uh, one knows that it has much to do with how citizens understand their sense of being in a city or in a country or in a region. And I think as much as conservation would involve palaces, monuments, all of these things, I think this sense that ultimately people inherit and own these things as citizens is very important. And I think a little bit of a discussion on this, if we can, I would really love. And then there was a what you mentioned when you presented Asia Society, sorry, Asiatic Library building. Why do we also, as a culture, disregard or disrespect our own public and civic buildings, which turns them with, again, I would say even the David Sassoon Library. There is something that we as citizens or government employees or employees of a larger network that lives through these buildings, government or non-government, we have a sense of disregarding what we have got. And then it brings in this whole rigmarole of having to conserve, including the Vadnagar example, or the way you sort of very nicely compared that one building in DN Road across the Blue Synagogue, to saying that, yes, that this would be a story even for, say, Kalba Devi, Buleshwar, Girgaon, all of these buildings. So we have a sense of misusing what we inherit, and then we talk of preserving culture. So there is a bit of a dichotomy in the way we also understand culture, and then obviously conservation practice. I think, and this is a third part, although it's a continuation. Conservation practice bears the burden of all of these things. So maybe if you could expand one from your years as being a student of conservation architecture to obviously you've traveled the world, been at conferences, seen how it happens in different parts of the world. What are the unique challenges to the context that you yourself defined, or we are in the context of, say, Asia society in India? What has been the challenges that are unique to South Asia or India, which in fact may sort of go back to the world as important learning lessons?
So, Kaiwan, I think one big difference is the population. While across the world, I mean, if you look at historic cities, they are beautiful. They're very beautifully restored, maintained, but they're not overused. In our countries, there's a population implosion. So the same building that should be used by 20 people is lived in by 200, and there's an overuse in very many cases. And because of that, it's also a matter of shared resources that then get stretched to the edges because there are not enough resources for those many people. So that is one issue. But there also is a lot of apathy that over decades it's almost become systemic, this whole government apathy and public apathy to heritage, because for so long we've been stuck with just utilitarianism, that we've just looked at, if we think that in 1833, for a library, they could, like for the town hall or the David Sassoon Library, they thought of beauty and function. But at some point, whether it was a post-Corbusian period, post-independence, we see just functionality and aesthetics, beauty is something that is considered a privilege or an indulgence or just not necessary. And as a result of that, if there were repairs, let's say if in the convocation hall that was lit by gaslight, if they brought in electricity, they took the shortest cut. So the shortest route, so the electrical cable would be cutting through the nose of a beautiful statue, a bust, carved in stone. The electrical engineer did not care because his BOQ is showing from point A to point B, which is the shortest route. We have done this generationally to our buildings. And I think really the problem began post-independence when we were just sort of making do. We've covered historic roofs with false ceilings because in the Bombay University, they wanted to air condition the Vice Chancellor's office, and therefore they got in a huge duct and then they put a false ceiling and they completely erased this 24-foot Burma teak ceiling, which was part of the original interior.
Yes. No, thanks. I think there's a pragmatism to this whole argument, but it's also true. And I've just finished an essay where I was saying that when we talk of urban aesthetics or cultural sort of heritage in buildings, it has something to do with how we feel as citizens or how we are treated as citizens or residents of a city, of a place, of a building. And this somewhere resonates. And I think it's an issue that needs much more detailed discussions. And I think case studies or buildings like yours allow us to have some of these conversations. So, I think this is one of the questions from the audience as well. I'll ask one of the more pragmatic questions. How do you upscale some of these buildings for new technologies? I think just 2 days ago, the police crime branch office has been brought down right across VT.
Really? That was a gorgeous building.
Yes. Where, as I think Midday reported, from Lokmanya Tilak to sort of Kasab, there's a history in that building. But they are building only a 5-story building again. And this was, I think, a 3 or 4 story building. And I imagine from that little article I read that the argument was that they needed more security, better equipped building, etc. But you have restored many buildings which have sort of continued to live their life quite successfully. So, what is the tussle when sort of new technology, new systems, new requirements of usage come in the picture, and heritage buildings have to live up to that?
So I think a case would be that of Opera House, where we had to bring in air conditioning into a building which had fans, and where we had to bring in acoustics to the level of an international opera singer being able to perform live.
Right.
And yet we managed to do that without putting in, reducing the volume of the original hall. It's all possible. We brought in
I imagine.
fiber optic cables into the Bombay High Court and air conditioning, the first VRV air conditioning in 2006. It's just a matter of first prioritizing and making sure you want to save the building rather than knock it down. There could be 100 reasons to knock down a building. But if you do decide you want to save it, then there's 100 reasons you can
work
100 ways
around.
to save it. Yes.
Yeah. No, thanks. And I think a question sort of between the first and the second, which was also an audience question, but I'm tying it in with sort of the difficulties or the burdens of a conservation architect. That when you have layers of history, like some of the examples that you had from Punjab, for example, when you have layers of history. How do you account for layers? Which layer do you stick to? Which layer do you extend into? And I would imagine even a city like Bombay, I think we've had many debates, and that multiple heritage is equally a part of our heritage. So how does the conservation architect engage with that problem or deal with that problem?
So the first is to at least identify all the periods of significance. And then it is a choice sometimes that you have to let go of one to get to a more important one, or it could be a choice to retain all of them. And that is, but it has to be an informed choice, and it has to be on the foundation of archival research. And that really establishes, the benchmark for where to take it. So I think that if you're able to establish that, like for example, at the Knesset Eliyahu synagogue for 30 years, I had seen it all this oil paint sky blue, and for 50 years other people of the community had seen it like that, and everybody remembered it as being sky blue. But when we did paint scrapes and we were able to go to the last layer and it was this sage green and gold, nobody had a problem with it because everybody knew this is definitely the old one.
The blue synagogue. So
yeah, I still call it the blue synagogue, but it wasn't blue after all. So sometimes the proof is just there and you don't have a choice.
Right.
But sometimes you do feel that, okay, like for example, a lot of these theaters, there's also an Art Deco level, though originally they were designed as Baroque interiors, Opera House being one of them. When we entered, the interior was Art Deco. But it just bothered me that how can the interior be Art Deco when the building was built in 1916? It predated Art Deco. And so we went through various layers of archives, and we found an old brochure that was printed in 1916 at the time of the opening, which described it and as an interior of art of Baroque. And then we watched a whole range of Hindi films, and we found one in the early 70s or late 60s with the climax scene shot there, and you could see all the Rococo balconies and all their glory. So.
And yeah, I think the takeaway is very important, that it's based on some kind of historical work, and then it's an informed choice. And I think, is it also sometimes a negotiation with, say, the client, or if the users are evident in a certain situation, or is it, I think the question was asking, is the architect deciding that I decide, or is it a negotiated choice sometimes?
For most public buildings, the good thing about public projects is that once you have got the approval, then there is no, then the client doesn't tend to interfere in, I like the color pink, so give me a color pink, even
Right,
though you
right.
do that. I
Because
think,
you are also the expert. I think that's something that we have to acknowledge, that the architect or the conservation architect is the expert.
and it's really, if it's based on conjecture, then it's your choice versus mine. But if it's
Right, right.
based on hard documentation and facts, then the evidence is what proves it.
Hmm. Were there any experiences of like you said, you found these four 80-year-old gentlemen who knew the lime plaster technique there and then could train. But for example, in Vadnagar, does it sort of open up histories of certain places in unique ways or special ways?
It
I
does,
don't think
but
there were good experiences and bad experiences or only good experiences. What does it do?
so in Vadnagar, actually, we're having a very interesting thing because these are not, as I said, they're not monumental buildings. They're just
Yes, yes.
small homes that are maybe
Hmm,
four generations lived, and they're
hmm,
like
hmm, hmm,
not what you would
hmm,
consider supreme heritage
hmm,
or monument. And that is why we're working on this, because we want to just be able to have one case at least where we're able to save a townscape. Because India and all of South Asia, we're losing townscapes and streetscapes at the drop
absolutely,
of a hat.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
there, in fact, the beauty of this project is that the project is being led by one of my associates, Shefali, who is a Gujarati, and she has been going to the site to the level that she tells me that everybody, every one of those people have her phone number. So they will call her and say, Sefali Ben. And in Gujarati, they'll be talking to her about their own
Hmm,
personal
hmm,
problems and their building. But it's so, the other day she came back
right.
and she said, the vegetable vendor gave me some sabzi and I didn't know what to do with it. And I told her, Shifali, this is the best thing. If
Yeah,
they
yeah,
feel that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
doing a good job, and even if they're giving you like
Hmm,
some bhaji that you are not going to do
hmm,
anything to, it's their way of telling you that they're agreeing with what you're doing for
hmm,
this
hmm,
for
hmm,
the
hmm,
community. So
hmm.
that, I think, their building trust is critical when you're working with
Right,
stakeholders.
right,
They should be able to know that you're doing it for them and
right, right,
your
right.
intentions are clear.
No, I'm aware of another case which has a very sketchy sort of a history, which is of Udwada. Uh,
Yes.
for obvious reasons, for I think the Parsis or the Zoroastrian community, it's like a Mecca. And it has gone through certain layers of conservation process, but not to the level that you speak about. So I think townscapes and cityscapes are extremely important. I don't think what has been possible with DN Road, there would be many examples yet to be quoted as parallel to DN Road. So I think this concerted effort is also very important, and trust there is, I think, very, very important. Abha, you showed us many projects. There were many sort of technical hints that you left. What have been some of the very important sort of technical eureka moments or knowledge building moments that from your practice, say a younger generation or a parallel generation of practice may be able to take when they are dealing with projects like this? Because this is valuable. Like I say every time, when you break down a building, you just don't lose material, but you lose the knowledge that has gone into making that building, like the detail of a window, the detail of a sill. And then you argue why buildings are leaking because you just throw away knowledge that has come through the experience of making buildings. So obviously, there is a retrieval of knowledge in the process that you follow as a conservation architect. What would one or two of those cases be?
So in some cases, like in the Ladakh project, I
Hmm.
learned, I would say, being the only outsider because
Hmm.
everyone else was, even the engineer, the workers were all Ladakhi.
Hmm.
The first year, the first 6 months, they were sussing me out whether I was good enough for the project. So I
Hmm.
had to build that for them. And that's why the first year was really about understanding various mud mixes, which clays work with what kind of is it a 1:3 ratio? Is it a 1:4 ratio? When do you use markhala? When do you use zasa? When do you mix the
Hmm.
two? And that really was a series of discussions with the local memes. So when you talk of technology, that was the lowest level of technology. We weren't bringing in anything scientifically, the same, but it was really putting together existing traditional practices which are handed down through oral history, and doing that, then doing trials and that to a level that we were able to do something that's as close as possible to the original techniques that were adopted 500 years ago. Based technology is used. We've used ground penetrating radar. We've used, photogrammetry. We've used LiDAR. All that has been used for projects ranging from from Chandigarh, where we were working on the Capitol complex for Corbusier, where our bulk of our fees went into getting LiDAR surveys done for each and every building, so we could actually go down to which was the Corbusian layer of paint, because you did not want to go wrong for something that important. To doing photogrammetry on projects like the Krishna temple. But at the end of the day, I would still say that you can have a lot of scientific information, but sometimes to be able to put it to use, and why are we doing this, and how is it going to benefit or inform the project, that's important. Because one can go into collecting a lot of data, and if you're not able to know what you want with that data, it can actually be a complete and utter waste.
Right. No, this is wonderful to know, because I think, conservation is very often only seen as this restoring a beautiful object. I think one is your presentation has told us that it's not about only restoring beautiful objects, but it reaches out to much larger human and community or social issues. The other is this sort of this pendulum between sort of knowledge as a historian and knowledge is the science of making buildings. I think also to sort of straddle these paths is important, and I think sometimes we underplay the professional and expert role that we play in the jobs we do. I was just sort of going through some of the questions from the audience, and there are many. I don't know how much time we have to cover all of them, but there is one question which I think we should address, but there may be a simple answer, because Abha, you've parallelly answered that, which is disability and inclusive design. I imagine that's maybe similar to what you were saying, that, if you want to make a building accessible, like you were saying, if you want to bring in a world-class acoustics to a building, you may be able to bring in, unless you want to add anything specifically to that.
No, we're working on Chennai's Victoria Public Hall, which was lying abandoned and shut down for decades. And yes, we are bringing in an elevator. We're looking at, physical, accessibility is very important. But there are also some cases where it just becomes virtually impossible. If you're looking at a site like Ajanta Caves that I worked on the management plan, yes, you can do the odd ramp. But at the end of the day, then you have to really think that the palki, which has been used by the Archaeological Survey of India for 100 years, it might not sound very, very much off the times, but maybe that is the option. So also, I guess with every site it varies.
Understand. Yeah. There's a question about an all-women architecture team. Are you an all-women architecture team?
We were an all-women architecture team for a very long time, and then we had one male architect, Krishna, join. And for now, even now, after 20 years, he's ribbed by saying, "Oh, see, Krishna is surrounded by gopis." But no, we have quite a few men on our team.
Yeah, I think at one point I remember it was your office and Shrimul Zaveri Kadri's office,
which were all,
and which I don't think by design. I think they just grew like as offices.
Yes. But even now, I would say we get a lot of applications. Much more. We have a lot of women, young architects or interns also apply to us. Maybe because they feel that it's a woman-led architecture practice, which it is. Right. But it's not an all.
Also, still very few single women-led architecture practices.
Yes.
So I think, and again, in just the range of context that you've showed us, there would be multiple challenges of being largely a woman-led a woman-led practice or a largely women team. There would be certain challenges.
Actually, no, I would like to believe that we have surpassed every challenge. I mean, for a site like Ladakh, we were a woman practice. For Vadnagar, our Vadnagar team is all women. We have 4 women currently, 2 architects and 2 interns stationed permanently at Vadnagar and managing very well.
We can take this question which had come early on, but maybe we can take that as the last question, which was about sort of it says particularly big cities like Bombay or Mumbai that are undergoing a lot of infrastructure development and construction. How do you see as the most urgent conservation or priority? Why? In this kind of a quick, fast desperately transforming city, I would say.
I think the most vulnerable are heritage precincts because, again, the focus has shifted to individual buildings, and what's falling by the wayside is heritage precincts like Khota Chiwadi, Gamdevi, you name them, Banganga, where because of 33(7) and cess and all the other advantages and incentives given to builders to increase the FSI, what's fallen by the wayside is the character of that precinct. And with a majority of the buildings under rent control, this has pretty much sounded a death knell for precincts.
I think what we are going to lose is parts of a city or a neighborhood that made us live as human beings. Maybe not all of them had the dignity that any public place should have, but that at least they still had a sense of humanity or a human touch.
Absolutely. And that human scale of Laburnum Row in Gamdevi or Banganga, that is what we're going to miss as a city if we allow this to go.
No, every time people are with me in Bhuleshwar, and less do I do that now. But the surprise that has been constant is from that heavy road, you suddenly step in 5 steps inside a building and you're in this beautiful, quiet courtyard. It's just the sound that makes it more human or livable or communal.
And also safer. I think they're palpably safer urban pockets. And this whole thing of gated communities does not bear well for
you can walk in
safety.
Some of these. I think it's just that the different. I think in one of your cases you said something like that. In the day you'll have one population in the like Kalagoda. Precisely right. Kalagoda, you mentioned that, but how a changing population will make that place live a full day in a way. Yeah. Abha, this has been wonderful. One more time, maybe one last question. I think since nobody's stopping me, but I'll stop myself soon. Many of these projects, since I have closely been looking at your work, we've had many conversations in your studio or at these kind of forums. I've seen certain projects be with you for a long time. The UNESCO filing, you said 14 years. I think this is also a very important question from a professional perspective or to understand the way cities and buildings work. What is the sense of time when projects linger over a long time in your office?
People in my studio say that I'm absolutely crazy because they make no economic sense. But if I were to give you a timeline of 2 urban projects, public projects, Crawford Market, we were appointed in 2007. And then there was this huge controversy of a builder being given the whole market for 1 rupee and he was going to build a huge building. And we as consultants to the BMC said, why should the government not retain ownership and we can still design something that we landed up creating a 1-acre open plaza within that dense urban fabric, not going beyond 1.33 FSI and not going higher in height either. It's the project of the full holistic redevelopment is going to be completed in 2027, which means 20 years. And our fees will not increase or anything, but that's 20 years, which I feel still are well spent because at the end of the day, if we were able to save Crawford Market and make sure that not a single vendor had to be evicted, or Gold Market in Delhi, we were appointed in 2005. And it's now that we are getting to restore it because with all such government projects, governments change, chairman change,
right.
there's court cases, there's litigation. So we've hung on for some projects for 2 decades.
Abha, thank you very, very much. If we keep talking, we can keep talking. But I think that's the beauty of having a body of work that you have, which I think allows us to draw from it, learn from it. And I think this is going to be important, valuable knowledge for the future when these projects become more public or they are published and things like that. So thank you so very much for your time
Thank
and
you.
conversation. And thanks to Asia Society for hosting us and the audience for being there through this evening and conversation. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.